I'm Robin, representing SunTV. Today, we are honored to interview Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO of FTX Exchange. Sam is the youngest crypto billionaire with a big warm heart for humankind. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to understand a bit more about Sam's journey into cryptocurrency and philanthropy. So first, could you tell us a little bit about your effective altruism philosophy and how it leads you to establish FTX?
Yeah, so, effective altruism is basically thinking about how can you maximize the amount of positive impact that you have on the world, and what should you do with your life and your career in order to to help have that impact. And I ended up going down the path of earning to give, which is basically trying to make as much as I can in order to be able to donate as much as I can, which led me to Wall Street and then later to start trading cryptocurrencies because it seemed like there was a lot of trading opportunities there. That was late 2017, and that's how I initially got into crypto.
That is awesome. So may we deduce that FTX is a vehicle through which you can most effectively amass the fortune and then distribute it for the benefit of society?
That's the hope.
Wonderful. So out of our curiosity, what does the acronym FTX stand for? Fungible Token Exchange? Full Speed Trading Exchange?
Yeah, so it's Futures Exchange. The F and the T, both from futures. Is where it originally came from. It was the working name of the exchange, and we just never came up with something that we liked better, so we just stuck with it.
Awesome, awesome. So when it comes to the first bucket of gold, would you like to share more stories about Kimchi Arbitrage?
Yeah, so the first thing that drew me to crypto was that it looked like there were really good trades to do, and in particular, there were arbitrages all over the place, cases where assets were trading a lot higher on one exchange than they were on another. The biggest, most famous of those is called the Kimchi premium, was the difference between the prices on US exchanges and on foreign non-US exchanges, particularly Korean exchanges. In this is like late 2017, early 2018, it got up to 50% premium in Korea at some point. That was a very difficult trade to do though, because the Korean won, it's a restricted currency, and so you couldn't actually complete that trade easily. What we ended up doing instead was looking at Japan, where Bitcoins on Japanese exchanges were trading at, about 10% higher than they were on US exchanges. And so it was a lot less extreme than Korea, but unlike with Korea, you could actually do the trades in Japan because, the Japanese yen, it's a free floating currency that you can actually get access to. And so, anyway, we started, looking into this in late 2017, built out the operational capacity to do it. In early 2018, did spend a while doing a bunch of arbitrage in crypto, but that was probably the biggest of them.
Wonderful. So actually, instead of calling it kimchi arbitrage, we should call it sushi arbitrage. Anyhow.
Yep.
And since right now we're on the topic of food, could you share the story about how you unintentionally intervened and helped out our SushiSwap in 2020?
Yeah, so SushiSwap, it's a decentralized exchange, and it was having a really exciting sort of beginning to its life, so to speak. Enormous amounts of attention were coming in, and it was quickly became the second biggest decentralized exchange by volume in the world. What ended up happening though, pretty quickly, was a disagreement emerged between the founder of it and the users of the protocol. The founder, who went by the nickname of Nomi. I don't know who they really are. I don't know anyone who does. Basically, there was this sort of developer fund, which got, fraction all of the tokens, and was intended to be used to support the people building out the protocol. Nomi, as the original developer, felt like it was appropriate for them to take a big slice of this developer fund. And so they did for themselves. The community was not happy about this and felt like, at most, Nomi should have only taken some slice of that, but more importantly, that should have been a discussion that was sort of openly had between Nomi and the community, that there should have been a vote over what to do with it. And Nomi didn't want to give back the funds. It turned into really a gigantic argument, and there wasn't really that much of a way forward from it. It was threatening to engulf the whole protocol and sort of bring it down. So Nomi was basically chased out of town. And I'd been sort of an observer of this and had commented on it a bit. And so on the way out, Nomi handed over control of some pieces of the protocol to me. I was not expecting this. I was asleep at the time when this happened, and was pretty confused. And so I ended up sort of spending the next, I say I, but it's really myself and the people working with me who did the heavy lifting from the developer side, spending the next week frantically sort of researching everything that we could about SushiSwap, and getting to the point where we understood the code that had been written and were able to help deploy this sort of like key transitionary element of it that was going to launch the final protocol, and then held an election for the sort of ultimate group that was going to help manage the control of the protocol going forward, getting it sort of like on the path to decentralization, and passing it back off to the community. But it was a pretty weird thing that just came in and sort of like intervened and very much changed the course of my plans to summer of 2020.
Right. So I think what Chef Nomi did was definitely one of the dumb things. And
yep.
So as you're the CEO of the leading derivative exchange, could you guide us not to do dumb things for a successful crypto product? Of course, you first start with the dumb things you see in existing peers.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we see them all over the place. And, I think part of what we see happening is, people see the enormous amount of success that a lot of projects have had in crypto. And many of them have done dumb things. And I think people sometimes end up sort of copying those dumb things, and saying like, I guess that's the thing you do here. And I think that's not the right takeaway. I think what's really going on there is that, if you're really early to crypto, that was phenomenal. I mean, it's amazing for your business, and you're sort of in the right place at the right time. And maybe that was not an accident. Maybe it's a great business decision to do that. Maybe you saw that, but that doesn't mean that everything that sort of the early businesses do is necessarily, the right business practice. Like, I think some of it is basically an accident. Basically, I think one key piece of this, which sounds sort of silly and obvious, but I think is really important and is often underappreciated, is, just because it sort of is this new wild space that seems to be growing so quickly, and that a lot of people are doing really well in, like, that doesn't mean, that sort of doesn't give you the right to ignore all of the normal factors that go into making a company do well. And we see this again and again, that people will decide that they want to build blockchain gaming, gaming on a blockchain, or integrations between video games and blockchain, and they'll forget to build a good video game. they'll sort of like build a really crappy video game and then integrate with the blockchain, and it'll sometimes be really popular because the truth is there's huge demand for blockchain integrations with video games. But I think the right thing to do is build a great video game and integrate anything that'd be even better. And so I think that sort of is one example of a thing that we see a fair bit that I think is like pretty silly and makes no sense from the outside, but happens a surprising amount in crypto and maybe isn't as shocking as you think, given some of the context. So, that sort of is one thing that I would start with, which is like, remember to always do a great job of whatever you're doing in sort of all of the normal ways. Like your sort of responsibility to do that certainly hasn't gone away. I guess like second thing that I would say is understand the regulatory environment. And it's a real task to like operate perfectly from a regulatory perspective in 200 jurisdictions at once. And it's something we put enormous amount of effort into trying to do as well as we could. And I certainly wouldn't say that, one should be expected to be held to perfection on that or anything. But I think something that we have seen a fair bit is people who don't even come close to living up to that, who instead do really egregiously dumb things from a regulatory perspective, who will run a business in a way that everyone knows is not sustainable, that any observer with any legal background would look at and say that's not a legal way to do that. Like there's just no ambiguity. It's far from, and there have been a number of players who have done this. There have been some exchanges, there have been some other companies. And I think this is one of these cases where it is a really messy area. And I don't want to sort of dismiss that fact because it is true and it is important. But just because it's complicated and messy doesn't mean that like nothing matters on the regulatory side. I mean, it's more of the opposite. I think a lot of things matter, but the fact that there's lots of gray area doesn't, there are still places without gray area. There are still places where it's absolutely clear what the answer is. And so again, I think it's one of these things where like there are straightforward ways to go about, understanding your regulatory context that will at least get you to a reasonable place. And you can't just like totally ignore that. Always sanity check what you're doing, use common sense. And not everyone does that. So yes, that's something else that I'd point to. And then the last thing is like when whatever your kind of core product is, like it's really important that you deeply understand the core functions that it's serving, how traditional finance has done those things if they have done them before, so you can understand whether it is correct to do it differently. And I think that like risk engines are one area that has historically been done quite poorly by a number of people in the industry. There are times when each day $1 million of customer funds were being lost to basically derivatives trading with risk engines that could not handle the positions that were being put on. And it's not good. It's a lot of funds to be losing to that. And so I think that's another case of like, I think what a lot of people were doing just did not pass sanity checks there. It's like at the point where you're bleeding $1 million a day to something, like you really should be checking that out. And people actually just sort of weren't in some cases. And so I think that's sort of another example.
Well, it's really good that you brought upon the point of the compliance, because ultimately, there are sayings that blockchain or decentralized finance is going to disrupt the traditional finance. And they are also saying that they are eventually going to merge and make it more efficient system. But in whichever aspect it is, I think it is great that you're willing to give all those testimonials before the House Committee hearing. And that's really something, because I think the CEOs and leaders in the cryptocurrency industry actually has a better and deeper understanding of the of what people need and what are probably the regulatory necessity. So openly talk with them and trying to basically foster a good environment for communication and even leading them towards the right decision. That's great. I watched the whole thing.
I really appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I think that there's a ton that that people in the industry have to contribute and add to the regulatory discussions as the people who see this all on the ground. But again, I think it's important to engage productively with regulators on that, to not come at it from a place of hostility. And I think that's going to go a lot further.
Right. Wonderful. So are you viewing the Solana as an Ethereum killer, a layer 1 with better performance, like you said, a good throughput, millions of transactions per second, or you'd rather give a slightly different perspective?
I think you give a slightly different perspective. And I think what I'd say is, there are different potential applications. I think that for any application where you want to have billions of users potentially, or really even hundreds of millions of sort of like daily users of it in an economically feasible way, it's going to have to happen on some really high throughput blockchain. I think Solana is one of the few with a chance of getting to that level. But there are some things that don't require that level of throughput, where it's a much smaller number of people or less frequently used vehicle, but which could store really valuable information. And so I think that it doesn't need to be an all or nothing thing, but I do think that the most scaling things are probably going to be happening on a some massively scaling blockchain. And I think Solana is sort of like one promising example of that.
Very cool. How do you view the current NFT market and how to tackle the problem of lack of liquidity in the NFT marketplace?
Yeah, so to some extent, some amount of lack of liquidity, frankly, is a little bit inherent to NFT markets. I mean, if you think about it, like the N there stands for non-fungible, right? Like that's the NF, right? So like the whole point is that these aren't like super liquid instruments, that these are bespoke instruments, each of which represent some unique thing. And so that is just like one thing I would like start by pointing out. And that I think does sort of at least somewhat highlight the extent to which it's not surprising that they're not super liquid, and it's not the end of the world. But I guess putting that aside for a second, like I think a lot of this is just ecosystem growth. It's just like, how can you get to the point where more and more people are using the ecosystem? What does that mean the ecosystem needs to evolve? That it doesn't have today. I think user experience is a piece of this. I think just generic growth of the crypto ecosystem is a piece of this. And I think we're going to see all of that growing out over time.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Sam, for the sharing a little bit about the story. We definitely want to hear more, but don't want to take up more of your time here. So you have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the future if possible. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
本期节目告一段落，我们下期再见。希望您来3连赞、点赞、订阅、关注我们的 Facebook 频道。